Today. Rosemary Ginty. Next is Marty Wolpoff, Chair of the Land Use and Law, Rules and Ethics Committee, and Vice Chair of Land Use. Laura Smallwood, the immediate past chair is on my left. Margaret Dell is hiding over there, somewhere over there. Hi, Margaret. So those are the members of the committee. We have 3 parts of hearing tonight. The first is a public hearing as required by law. Well, that's where you're second. The first is going to be a presentation by the Department of City Planning on the city of ES-housing, then a public hearing, and then the committee. City of ES, the Housing Opportunity Committee. What I would like to do, if it's at all possible, is to move this along. We had a couple of presentations in connection with the committee report. So let's start with City Planning's presentation. They are on Zoom.
Hello, good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you for having us. For those who don't know me, my name is Camila Thomas. I'm the Board Liaison for DCP's Bronx office. I'm joined today by my colleague, John Mangan. John, would you like to introduce yourself if you like? Or John is director of our housing division, and he's here with me to accompany me and
Sorry
answer.
about that. I wasn't able to unmute for a second there, Camilla.
It's okay.
Hello, everyone. Good to be back at CB8. I'm John Mangan, director of our housing division, and very happy to answer your questions and take notes on your feedback tonight.
Awesome. Okay, so without further ado, I'm wondering if I can share my screen now. Yes, I can. Okay. So you guys should be able to see a screen that says City of Yes for diversity, affordability, et cetera, et cetera. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Again, thank you all for joining us today to hear our presentation on the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. My name is Camila Thomas, and I'll be giving you a presentation on our proposal. Before we start, we just want to give a quick breakdown or an agenda for tonight's presentation. We'll start with an introduction and overview of the proposal, move through the low density, medium and high density proposals, talk about the citywide proposals, and then finish with a recap before moving on to conclusion and Q&A and discussions. So we're very excited again to hear from you about the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, a citywide text amendment that will change zoning to allow for more equitable housing development. These changes will enable a little more housing in every neighborhood by removing barriers to housing growth. City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is a citywide plan that will encourage incremental housing growth over a wide geography. So tonight I'll explain how you can expect this proposal to apply not just citywide, but also more specifically in Community District 8. So New York City faces a very severe housing shortage. The vacancy rate for rental apartments is historically low at this point, only 1.4%. Far below a healthy vacancy rate that would provide New Yorkers with housing options. In the Bronx, the vacancy rate is currently 0.82%. Because our housing demand is greater than our housing supply, New Yorkers are experiencing very high housing costs. Over half of New York City renters are rent burdened, meaning they spend over 30% of their monthly income on rent. Not having enough homes is also the direct cause of homelessness in many cases. So the city calculates that each night of 2023, over 92,000 homeless New Yorkers slept in shelters. Most of New York City's housing was created in the first half of the 20th century. Since that time, housing production has fallen dramatically, and that's in part because of the zoning that has become increasingly restrictive since 1961. While housing production has decreased, the demand for housing has increased. There are a number of reasons for this. For example, households are smaller today than they used to be before, meaning that even the same amount of people take up the more space. What recent housing production has occurred has been limited to only a few neighborhoods. In 2023, 10 community districts produce as much housing as the other 49 combined. When some neighborhoods stop producing housing, the way we're seeing today, that puts additional pressure on the other neighborhoods to produce more and more housing. The proposals in the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity emerged from the goals outlined in the Where We Live NYC, the city's fair housing plan. Where We Live NYC was created by HPD in collaboration with over 250 community organizations. It highlights how the city's housing shortage and affordability crisis have severely limited New Yorkers' housing choices. In a tight housing market, landlords can charge high rents, and existing tenants are vulnerable to tenant harassment, poor housing quality, and displacement pressure as they compete with each other for a limited number of units. When there are fewer apartments to choose from, renters pay more. In the Bronx, 60% of renters are considered rent burdened. These conditions further worsen the neighborhood-based legacies of segregation, discrimination, and concentrated poverty that have led to deeply unequal city that we have today, where neighborhoods have unequal access to resources and opportunities. The average New York City household makes about $70,000 a year, but the average two-bedroom apartment in New York City is currently around $2,700 monthly for rent. This means that your average working family would have to spend about half of their income on rent just to secure a home for their families. New York City's dire housing shortage has direct human consequences. These have been underscored in our extended community engagement process. Over the past year, DCP has met with over 100 groups. This includes housing nonprofits, tenants groups that advocate for rights, faith-based organizations, and affordable housing providers. Each of these groups was able to share a unique and valuable perspective on the lived experiences resulting from our housing crisis. When New York City fails to produce more housing, all New Yorkers feel the economic consequences. When people have to spend so much of their income on housing, they have less money to spend on everything else. Allowing New York to build more housing can also help to create good quality jobs in construction and residential maintenance, adding an estimated $58 billion to the city's economy, and creating approximately 260,000 new jobs. So many city agencies currently work on policies and programs that aim to address New York City's housing needs. The Department of City Planning, or DCP, where John and I work, is responsible for the city's zoning. So zoning regulates what can be built on a particular site, both how big the building can be and what uses it can have. For example, residential, commercial, or community facility. Sometimes zoning includes other things like requirements for income-restrictive affordable housing, but zoning does not fund new housing or directly control what will be built. It only establishes rules for what may be built. How much housing gets built depends on many factors. Other tools the city uses to support good housing outcomes include subsidies or tax incentives to promote income-restricted affordable housing, programs for affordable home ownership, and tenant protections that guarantee New Yorkers' rights. Changing our zoning can respond to these issues by increasing the number of types and the number of homes available in every neighborhood across the city. So if each neighborhood adds a little more housing, New York City can add a lot more housing overall without any single neighborhood experiencing dramatic changes or overall taxing the infrastructure in the neighborhood. So before we dive into the details of the proposal, we wanted to illustrate what the different zoning districts, residential zoning districts would be that would fall under low density and mid to high density for the proposals that we're presenting today. So R1 to R5 districts are considered low density districts and mapped in low density areas. And these districts produce single family, two family, and low density multifamily buildings, as you see on the left. And R6 through R10 districts are considered to be high density, so mid to high density apartments. And they typically build or produce the buildings that you see on the diagram on the screen. So now for an overview of the proposals. And again, we'll step through a bit more thoroughly later on in the presentation as we go along. So our text amendment currently is the biggest pro-housing change DCP has ever undertaken and would touch zoning for every single part of the city. On the left here, we have a map showing the areas in the city considered to be low density, shown in blue, and medium to high density in orange. So the Universal Affordability Preference, UAP, is a proposal which would allow bigger buildings for affordable housing in every medium to high density zoning district across the city. The proposal would remove residential parking mandates, which are making housing more expensive. The proposal would also add more missing middle housing or low-rise apartment buildings in our low-density areas. The proposal also aims to help homeowners in low-density neighborhoods by allowing them to add accessory dwelling units or ADUs to their homes and providing smaller buildings with additional flexibility to adapt over time. And there are also a range of smaller proposals, which include enabling conversions to of non-residential buildings, allowing more small and shared apartments, and allowing for residential campuses to add height-limited buildings into existing properties. So here in this slide, in the map on the right, we have a zoom-in version of the previous map, this time zoomed in to focus on Community District 8. So moving forward, when we talk about a proposal, I'll show you a map that shows citywide applicability, and then we'll do a zoom in to show where the you can expect the proposal to apply in Community District 8. Okay, so let's move on to discussing the low density proposals. So exclusionary housing rules have made it virtually impossible to build housing in many low density neighborhoods, placing additional pressure on the high density parts of the city to produce more housing. This wasn't always the case. Small apartment buildings and 2 to 3 family homes are more common in all of New York City's lower density neighborhoods and were allowed in many places until as recently as the 1990s and early 2000s, when stricter zoning prevented them from doing so. City of Yes for Housing Opportunity would reintroduce modest buildings that are more naturally affordable than other types of construction and apartment buildings at a scale in which they can take advantage of existing affordability programs. Together, these changes allow for the creation of more housing in low density areas without affecting neighborhood character. Okay, so here in City 8 in the map on the screen, most or a lot of the Community District 8 is already mapped as low density residential, and that includes neighborhoods like Riverdale, North Riverdale, and Fieldston. Next, for our town center proposal is our proposal which aims to create more missing middle housing in low density areas. Missing middle refers to a category of housing that's modest in scale and often affordable to middle income residents, a once common type of housing that's not often built in the city anymore. This proposal aims to re-legalize mixed-use apartments or buildings with a ground floor commercial use and a few stories of housing on top, as you see on the little video that's playing on the slide. This is a classic New York City building type that exists along many low-density commercial corridors already. Overly complex zoning rules make it almost impossible for new buildings of this typology to be built anymore. Our town center proposal streamlines zoning rules, including restrictive limits on floor areas and heights, so that it is once again feasible to build 2 to 4 stories of housing above commercial ground floor. And here in Community District 8, the town center proposal would be applicable in a few areas. Most of them, or the biggest portions of them, would be up in the north, along Riverdale Avenue and Moshulu Avenue. Our second proposal for low density is the transit-oriented development proposal. Transit-oriented development would allow for low-rise buildings, which are 3 to 5 stories tall, depending on the underlying zoning or the existing zoning, on sites that are near transit and meet specific criteria. So first, the site must be on a block within a half mile of a subway or rail station. Second, the lot must be over 5,000 square feet. Finally, the lot must be located on the short end of a block or a wide street, which zoning defines as being over 75 feet wide. Community facilities like faith-based organizations or libraries can also use these rules throughout the city on sites over 5,000 square feet where a community facility space is present. Our transit-oriented development rules would promote missing middle housing while also promoting sustainability by adding housing in areas with good transit access. So zooming into Community District 8, a lot of the district would already apply for the transit-oriented development proposal, including areas like Kingsbridge Heights, Spine Dibble, Marble Hill, and a portion of Riverdale in the north, because I believe it's close to the Metro North station in Riverdale. In the rest of low-density areas, CHO aims to give homeowners more flexibility through accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Under this proposal, a 1 to 2 family home would be allowed to add a small accessory dwelling unit, as you see in the graphic or the diagram. There are a range of types of ADUs, including backyard cottages, garage conversions, and basement apartments. These small units would provide important housing options for small households, like a young person moving into their own place for the first time, or an elderly grandmother or aunt who wants to age in place with their family. Because of their small size, they also serve different income levels than a large single-family home. Successful ADU programs in other places in the United States include Austin, Seattle, and Connecticut. And these examples have shown us that these units can give multi-generational families a little more space and help middle-class homeowners with household expenses. The proposal includes rules to ensure that ADUs are safe. New basement ADUs would not be allowed in the coastal floodplain, and no ADUs would be allowed in the special coastal risk districts, areas in our city with very severe flood risk. Outside of these coastal areas, basement ADUs may be subject to additional regulations and review. The same rule changes that enable ADUs can also help homeowners who don't want to add an ADU, but need more flexibility to adapt or renovate their homes to meet their needs. Our research shows that many existing buildings are actually out of compliance, meaning they're not in line with today's rules. For example, R41 districts are 2-family districts allowing semi-detached buildings like the ones you see in the picture on the screen. But buildings like these, pre-1961 duplexes, could not be built today because they have more square footage than what is currently allowed, and their rear yards are too small. These non-compliances can cause big headaches for homeowners if they need to borrow money from the bank, or if they want to make small changes to their home, like renovating an outdated kitchen or expanding a kitchen. The proposal would fix these rules, which would have dual benefits. First, homeowners of existing buildings won't run into issues when they go to make alterations to their building, because the zoning would better match what's actually on the ground. And second, you'll actually have the opportunity and the ability to build a 2-family home in a 2-family district, or a multi-family home in a multi-family district, when today the only thing you could feasibly build is single-family home. Next, we're going to turn our attention to the medium and high density proposals in areas of New York City. So our focus in these areas is creating more opportunities for housing, including affordable housing. In order to do this, the proposal introduces the Universal Affordability Preference, or UAP. It would allow apartment buildings to be at least 20% larger, so long as all the extra space occupied by the permanently or is occupied by permanently affordable or supportive housing. UAP is modeled after current rules that allow for bigger buildings for affordable seniors in some neighborhoods. UAP would allow incremental housing growth in neighborhoods and encourage affordable housing throughout the city, rather than concentrating it in a few neighborhoods. So the map shown here on the screen is showing districts that have existing senior housing preferences today. Those are the areas that you see in light orange. Throughout UAP or through the UAP framework, all forms of affordable and supportive housing would be able to take advantage of higher FARs or floor area ratios already provided to affordable senior housing in these districts. However, there are a few districts that don't have senior housing preference today. You see those on the screen in the darker orange. In these areas, the proposal would create new FARs to enable the growth of affordable and supportive housing in every neighborhood. The proposal would also make sure that zoning provides room to build the extra affordable housing required through UAP. So there would be limited height increases where it is necessary to make room for the affordable homes on top. So here's a map showing where UAP would then apply Community District A. We see it mostly Marble Hill, Kingsbridge Heights, and Van Cortlandt Village. So what does affordability mean for UAP? UAP would have affordability requirement of 60% area median income. Area median income, or AMI, is a measure of affordability established by the federal government. A 60% AMI, or $76,200 for a family of 3, UAP would serve more lower income New Yorkers than the existing zoning tool, voluntary inclusionary housing. UAP would replace the voluntary inclusionary housing program, but mandatory inclusionary housing, or MIH, as is commonly known, which requires a percentage of new developments to be income restricted, affordable housing, would continue to exist and be mapped where there are significant increases in residential density. UAP would serve New Yorkers at even lower income levels through income averaging. Income averaging means that instead of only including homes at the required affordability level, a building can include homes at a range of incomes that average the required affordability. For example, a building could meet UAP's 60% AMI affordability level by including a mix of homes at 30% AMI, 60% AMI, and 90% AMI. Throughout UAP's deeper affordability requirement and the introduction of income averaging, UAP can help to serve low-income New Yorkers who most need affordable housing. So here's an example of how universal affordability preference, or UAP, would work. So if a church, let's say the church on the screen, located on an R6 district, wants to build affordable housing today, they get 3.0 FAR, regardless of whether they're developing market rate of affordable housing. This would allow them to build about 35 units. Under UAP, they will get the new FAR for R6, which is 3.9, but the additional 0.9 FAR could only be used for affordable housing. If it is then affordable housing, they can build about 10 to 12 more units. 10 to 12 more units might not seem like a lot for a building of the scale, but this is functioning, again, at a citywide scale. So if every project that's coming up has a few more affordable units, the city can add a significant amount of affordable housing, and no single neighborhood would experience very drastic changes in its character. This is a rendering, to their renderings showing how UAP would play out. So without UAP, as you see on the left, the building is built according to the base FAR for market rate housing. The result is an 8-story building. But with UAP, the building can be about 20% bigger, which for this example translates to an additional 2 stories, so long as the extra space is permanently affordable housing. UAP can make a very big impact on our housing crisis. In our preliminary calculations, we determined that UAP, or if UAP had been in place since 2014, with tax incentives and public subsidies supporting it, an additional 20,000 income-restricted affordable homes could have been created and house around 50,000 New Yorkers. Okay, switching gears, I'm now going to present the citywide proposals. Starting with our parking mandate, our parking proposal would make parking optional for new housing everywhere, following the example of many other major cities in the country. Today, New York City requires new housing to include off-street parking even when it's not needed or where it's not needed. These mandates mean less space for housing and increased construction costs, which result in less housing being built. The diagram here on the slide represents how parking takes up a lot of space. 2 parking spaces is equivalent to the size of a studio apartment, roughly. Building parking itself is also expensive, and it's an obstacle to housing growth, especially affordable housing. And our proposal prioritizes housing over parking. Parking would still be allowed, and we anticipate that developers will respond to market needs and continue to provide parking in areas where there is high demand. Removing parking mandates can help reduce the cost of housing construction and enable development of more homes in each new building. Okay. Next, CHO includes a series of additional proposals that will include or provide more housing at a wider range of housing types. First, conversions. Today, outdated rules prevent underused and non-residential buildings like offices from converting to housing. For example, many buildings that were constructed after 1961 or are located outside of the city's largest office centers cannot convert into housing. CVS for housing opportunity would make it easier for underused non-residential buildings such as offices to be converted into housing. To do this, we would make a few changes to our current adaptive reuse regulations. First, the proposal would expand these regulations citywide to go beyond office districts. That way, a broader range of underused buildings like vacant schools and former religious buildings like churches can be converted into housing. Second, the proposal would make the cutoff eligibility wider, so it would expand from 1961 or 1977 to be up to 1991. This allows for more recently constructed buildings to be converted into housing. And third, the proposal would enable conversions to all types of housing, including supportive housing, shared housing, and dorms. Next, here, our next proposal would also make small and shared apartments legal by eliminating the dwelling unit factor, a measure of the minimum average unit size in areas with good transit access. This would provide more housing opportunities for New Yorkers who want to move alone but do not have the option today. Currently, we force too many people who want to live alone to find roommates and occupy family-sized units in many parts of the city. And this we foresee that will enable relieving some of the stress that is caused that's causing to like larger families that are unable to find big apartments because they're being shared by other people. Okay. Finally, our previous development often took place under Tower in the Park style regulations called height factor in campuses, although DCP has developed more recent set of regulations and for contextual buildings. Sorry, start again. So for our last proposal for citywide would be the eliminating barriers to contextual infilling. So previous development often took place under Tower in the Park style regulations called height factor. So although us DCP has developed more recent set of regulations for contextual buildings that have height limits and result in better design, some sites like NYCHA campuses, for example, can access those rules. So for this proposal, we would allow height limited infill buildings on sites that would otherwise be forced to develop tall, skinny buildings or nothing at all. Okay, now to conclude the presentation, before we move on to discussion and Q&A. So the changes I walk you through tonight are the most significant proposals in the City of Yes for housing opportunity. Overall, the text amendment aims to create a little more housing everywhere so that each neighborhood does its part to address the housing needs, and a few neighborhoods don't feel the intense pressure that they do today. It's important to keep in mind that CHO is not just about more housing. We're also focusing on building different types of housing, multifamily homes where it's currently not allowed because of exclusionary housing, homes of different sizes to meet different needs of different people, and most importantly, far more affordable housing and supportive housing than there is available today. And to conclude, and thank you again for listening, I'll end with this slide that shows our current timeline for public review, and includes our current email for any questions that the members of the public and the board might have about City of Yes for housing opportunity. You can also find more information on our website that I can circulate to Farah, the DM of the board. And with that, I will end, and John and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I would like at this point to do is to convene the public hearing portion of the agenda so we can deal with all of these pieces together. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's much appreciated. Now, I call to order the public hearing as required by law with respect to this matter. Let me, yes, let's have attendance from the special committee. Molly. Carl Verbo, present. Margaret Della. She's here. Rosemary Gitti.
Present.
Jessica Sosa.
Present.
Laura Spalter. Martin also present. We have a quorum. Let me in order so that you get the complete picture. Ask you to be further questions. Let me request, unless somebody on the committee objects, but we defer the questions for the public hearing and the public statements for just a few moments, so you can put in context a bit of historical information that will explain in context what this application is all about. This board is kind of fortunate in that it includes at least two people who have lived housing for the better part of their adult lives. Rosemary Gitti was on staff of the City Planning Commission. She was its representative to this board. She was the controller's representative on zoning and on housing. She was Mayor Edward I. Karcher's representative in these areas. She knows more about zoning than I think probably anyone. I was the Commissioner of Housing and Buildings who enforced the zoning resolution. Let me just give you a bit of background. The core of this zoning resolution was to take effect in 1965, in September of 65. Its predecessors were carved out by two former chairs of the City Planning Commission, Sam Blaustein, who was the chairman and who lived in this community, and indeed was the creator of what is now Riverdale Avenue, Henry Hudson Parkway, and the sloping zoning going down both sides, and made sure that this community had the kind of zoning plan it in fact does. And then James Felt, who had been the real estate commissioner, had the expertise in developing housing, building housing, and the like. The zoning, current core of the current zoning was enacted to take effect September 1, 1965. It was briefly administered by a superbly able man by the name of Judith Griffiths, who later became deputy mayor and counsel to the governor of the state of New York. I succeeded Judith Rivets at a time when corruption in the housing entities was rampant. We were putting as many building inspectors in jail with the help of Frank Hogan as they were on the force. That's an exaggeration, but not by damn much. As the housing situation became evident then, it was evident in the following way. Times Square was an area that you crossed at your own peril. Many parts of the concourse were in roughly the same shape. Co-op City soon thereafter opened up, and the concourse emptied out, and everything changed in the nature of the communities in the Bronx. You took your life in your hands when you went to the area of Fox Street. City was in trouble. And so at the time, the city of New York chartered 3 courses. One, a housing maintenance code for the first time establishing basic standards for housing. A brand new building code to provide a modern uplift to city construction. And the new zoning ordinance, which this building commissioner was my task to interpret and enforce. Now, there is one very critical difference between those changes, which have lasted for 40 and 50 years and more, and stood the city in good stead, and what is here proposed. They were crafted by Columbia University. Frank Grant's school at Columbia University did the housing maintenance code. Cooper Union helped us draft the building code. We called upon every major university to help us put together the various codes over there and to help us interpret this new zoning ordinance. This has had no such significant input by any academic institution or independent institution of expertise in the area. There was another thing. What we had at that time was to try and build housing because housing was in terrible shape. Remember, the Bronx is burning. Remember, we had fires all over the Bronx and elsewhere. Buildings were abandoned left and right. And the city of New York had a real problem on hand, and the Bronx had the worst problem of all. It was in that context that we took a good hard look at what we need to do with housing. And it was looked at first by the independent expertise of the academics, and then by the politicians and the public service. They were as follows. The first cost is so-called soft cost. That is the development plans, the filing of the creation of development schemes so that they could do it. Number 2 was the issue of the land cost. Land cost at that time was a little bit cheaper than it is now. Why? Buildings had burned down. And so we had a surplus of land that was used for years thereafter, until relatively recently provided the foundation for the affordable housing in New York City. And underscore that word affordable, because I want to come back to it. I know that part of it because for the last 20 years, I have served as a member of the New York City Housing Development Corporation, the principal entity that lends money for the building of affordable housing throughout New York City. Appointed and reappointed by successive governors since Mario Cuomo. What we saw when this administration that I've spoken about took office, and it was amplified further under Ed Koch's administration, was a real problem. The New York County grand jury under Frank Hogan had issued a detailed presentment showing that SRO, single room occupancies, were one of the largest blights upon the city of New York, and they were proliferating all over town. The West 90s was a hub. every second building was either an opium den or a house of prostitution. I condemned the better part of 100 apartments in just that area of the city of New York in the span of 2 years, because they were used for one or another of those purposes, and the landlords wouldn't do anything about it. The next part of it is that on Fox Street in the Bronx, we had them up and down the line. I looked at an old newspaper clipping, I didn't realize it until I looked at it and saw that the fellow standing next to me, who was, I was told, a landlord, had an unsheathed knife. And it shows up in the front page of the New York Times. I didn't know it until then. The area was rough. It has gotten better, but it isn't where it should be. So that's SROs. They were in hybrid, they were on the area around Fox Street, and they were on some of them even on University Avenue as it moved out. This is 60. What was done to try and change that within time? Fellow by the name of Donald Elliott was then the chairman of the city planning commission. And his idea was a very simple one. We have a significant amount of vacant land space. That gets rid of the land cost. Now, substitute for that, the city substituting for that cost, by advancing the money. The Mitchell-Lama program had as its core the kind of low tax, low interest rate loans that would make it possible for people to develop that. And so that was the kind of house, it is all over this community, Mitchell-Lama House. It is as solid as you are going to find 60 and 70 and 80 years later. Open space. New York City terribly needed open space. It was something that was a real problem. This proposal proposes to make you have dense space. So we can put a building in the backyard. We can add a couple of floors on a building where we live. The concept has a fundamental good point. It has been used in one major city. But it is not a one-size-fits-all plan. It is each application has to be reviewed by the local governmental entity to make sure it fits in with the needs of the community. And that plan is for a city which has some 20% of the housing is unoccupied year-round because it's for tourists. It's the city of Jerusalem. The program is Tamar. It has been hugely successful. As different cities. City of Jerusalem has only a 4-story building by law. And they now are being allowed to add 2 stories to it. Nothing in the backyard, nothing to create a more dense atmosphere. Indeed, I told my friend, the vice chairman of the tenement house museum, that he really ought to rename it the city of tomorrow or the city of yes. But that's not the way we need to have the kind of density in this town. Building inspector. Understand, we are living in a city that today has a wonderful game of fooling you with words. It's not just this administration, please. This is a problem. Let me give you an example. We are told we need more housing. Let me tell you why building inspectors were arrested for corruption and indicted and convicted. Not because they were selling extra floors. They were selling time, and they still sell time. Time between the time you apply for a building permit and the time you get an approval of a CBO is critical to any development. It's one of the most critical costs, and you will pay to get that inspector to the site. Now, why is that an issue? Because there weren't enough building inspectors. So congratulations of the city administration, we have reduced the number of building inspectors in New York. At this time, when we talk out of the other side of our mouth of building more affordable housing. The same thing goes, we have reduced the amount of aid that the city is giving for the construction of affordable housing. We need more affordable housing. Who do you think is going to spend the money to do that if you do these kind of things? Parking. Parking was a serious issue. Candidate for mayor of the Conservative Party was a man by the name of William Butler. He wrote a major newspaper at the time. And he was a serious voice for conservative. He had a solution to traffic in New York. Make all streets one way out of town. Now, DOT is copying versions of that right now. But parking is essential for the people who live in the outer boroughs. This concept of let's have no more parking may be viable in Manhattan. It does not have viability in the outer boroughs. Take the person in the East Bronx. They just don't have public transit. That's why Freddie Cabrera and I on the MTA put through the requirement that we open up the Metro North rail tracks on the other side of the park near the Botanical Gardens, so that they could be one stops for people who wanted to take the new Metro North railway down. You can take a train now from that part of town, and in 18 minutes get into Midtown. You can't get a subway. You can't get a bus at the time either. So those are the things that retrogress. They do not progress. There was one piece of this that was critical. A man by the name of John Zapati, who Rosemary will tell you about. And it was probably the most important influence in the construction of decent housing and planning in the city's history. Became the city planning commissioner and city chairman of city planning. And we had something that he helped fashion in advance. The former city community planning boards became community. And they were representing the communities, and they gave community. This is part of an age-old struggle between centralized government and decentralized. This is one where the people in the community, like who are taking the time to come here tonight, have an opportunity to say what's on your mind and where you're going. Let me give you one last actual illustration. In 1960, Times Square was a place that you took your life in your hands to walk through the area. Okay. And what you had then was every kind of petty criminal activity you can imagine in the area. The first thing that this fellow did, and he was assisted by John Scotty, is to authorize bonuses for the construction of the lighting that makes Times Square a very different place. Of zoning that was adapted to that area with the signs that they have in the area. And they changed the nature of the area. And it was for many years one. I had my office near the area for the first time in my legal career. Let me tell you an interesting fact. It's getting back to where it was when I saw it in the 60s. Why? Nobody cares. So let me give you an example. We have a homeless shelter off Broadway. Do you think the tourists enjoy that? A brand new hotel was taken over, became a homeless shelter. And if you remember a few weeks or months ago, the number of the residents of that poured themselves out and beat the hell out of a bunch of cops. Remember that story at that time. And then we take another place where the tourists in the city are present. We take Grand Central. We take over the Roosevelt Hotel, do the same damn thing there, walk there any day, it's all over every street. The stores are closing up one after the other. What's the problem? We have no centralized, realistic, professional kind of housing program in the city. You hear the word affordable housing. Now, I've been interpreting that as a member of the New York City Housing and Development Corporation for the last 2 decades. Let me tell you a story. If I have a family of with three kids, and I make $200,000 a year, I'm eligible for affordable housing. And it's being built in the Bronx with that in mind. It's being built today in the Bronx for people of that time. You put 60% of AMI in the building. And the rest would be all other numbers, and that's common. Drive down the West Side Highway, and you'll see this beautiful, in terms of artistic looking building that looks like a pyramid. There are 10 affordable housing units in there, and the rest of it high rent district. That's how the game is played. There is no definition of affordable housing. Ask the chair, the commissioner of HPD, the former borough president of the Bronx, who has done a splendid job as commissioner of HPD, Adolfo Carrion. And he will tell you, I'm not sure how affordable housing is anything other than a substitute term is misapplied. That's a fact. Where you can have this broad range, and if you put one tenant in, it's affordable housing. What are you kidding? Understand something. The people in the real estate industry are using their own money. They're called speculators because they speculate that their skills and their money and their talent will help them make a buck. Nowadays, those folks are of two kinds. Those who build so-called luxury housing for luxury housing state. And those who build this kind of housing for that state. What we need is true affordable housing, and this is where I'm going to make 2 points to you and finish up. Let me tell you what the costs are that make New York City's housing so expensive. Their land costs, their development of soft. They are the construction costs, which are loaded with taxes. So if we want to reduce them, all you have to do is waive all city and state taxes on the materials that go into the building, and you've got a nice pot of money to reduce the rents and make it affordable. Construction costs also include a lot of the boondoggle I represent Lakeview that it take to occur in that area. It's true. Those are the kinds of things people ought to work with. And so let me make one other point, which I cannot let go. One of the themes of this proposal is to end single-family housing as we know it. That is a major civil rights violation, as this committee board has experienced. In the course of the past 5 or 10 years, Rosemary and others worked on an area around Claflin Avenue and that general area of Keene, where there were small homes built by people of color and of Latinos, who now had an opportunity to do what they had always wanted to do, own their own home, and not have to walk the corridors and smell somebody else's food. Now, what was happening, however, was because of the approaches of these administrations, they are allowing high-rise buildings to be put next to them, and buildings that are jammed with more apartments than are legally allowed. There are not enough building inspectors, and there are 10, 12 apartments where there should be 2. Or 15 people in a room, and I'm not exaggerating. The new proposed building up on Broadway is supposed to be a shelter. The city of New York's giving them $400 million and more to maintain that. To maintain 12 people in a room in plain violation of what we put in the multiple dwelling law to stop those kind of SRO things in housing fit for people for living. That is the background against which I tell you, this is properly entitled the city of yesteryear, or the city of yesterday, because it cannot be the city of tomorrow. Because if it continues down that road, it will go the way of San Francisco, it will go the way of Newark, it will go the way of Portland, Oregon, and other major cities in the United States, where they have not paid attention to the people who live in these wanted. There is no reason you need to put homeless housing or migrant shelter Times Square. It's just no reason, they're not gonna get a job there unless they put on, penguin's hat and march around and hustle a few tourists. Or if they beat up a few cops or tourists. That's not gonna work. But that's the kind of approach that's going on now. This thing ought to be shelved until a thorough study is made with the assistance, if not drafted by, any one of the major educational institutions that have a real estate school, that have an architectural school, and that have people like the former chair of the Landmarks Commission, Rita Paulson, who actually know how to get housing built and get it done. Architects who know what they're doing. It isn't something for the politicians. They'll screw it up every time, be included in that way. Now let's go over to the question. Deirdre. The first is Rob Ford. You're great. Rob, are you on?
Yes, I am. Okay. Good evening. My name is Rob Spalter. I am chair of the Broadway Community Alliance, and tonight I speak on its behalf. We are a civic association that formed in 2011 to address land use and quality of life issues in and around the Broadway corridor in North Riverdale. Don't be fooled by the nifty PR jingle, a little bit of housing in every neighborhood. These massive zoning changes in the city of Yes represent the needs of deep-pocketed special interest groups, lobbyists, real estate, construction, and not-for-profit housing developers. Yes, we have an affordable housing crisis in New York City. However, it is a false narrative that the city of Yes will solve this crisis. The reality is the city of Yes largely promotes unneeded luxury and market rate housing, not affordable housing. Developers will receive a 20% bonus in floor area ratio if they voluntarily add a small yet undetermined number of so-called affordable units in R6 through R10 districts. A more apt name would be City of Cement, because increasing density, expanding building envelope, and reducing open space will seriously impact our antiquated infrastructure, exacerbate flooding, and destroy our quality of life and neighborhood character. We oppose the gutting of our land use protections and the loss of community review through the elimination of Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or ULURP. Instead, we get a one-size-fits-all zoning change that will allow unbridled development as of right where it is currently prohibited. We oppose transit-oriented development. It will incentivize demolition of 1- and 2-family homes to build 5-story buildings in low R1 and R5 neighborhoods. This provision also dilutes the successful downzoning of several neighborhoods included in Community Board 8's 197A plan, which was hard fought and finally approved by the City Council and the Department of City Planning in 2003. We oppose town center zoning, which will allow 4-story apartment buildings to be constructed above ground floor businesses on Riverdale and Marshallou Avenues in North Riverdale. If implemented, new construction will result in demolition of current buildings and displacement of current businesses, along with the resulting higher commercial rents. We oppose eliminating off-street parking requirements for all new buildings constructed on the city of Yes. This outrageous proposal brings to mind the quote attributed to George Orwell over 100 years ago. The quote is, "There are some ideas so absurd that only an intellectual could believe them. Don't usurp, ULURP. Please reject City of Yes." Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Robert Morrison.
Is it on? It's on. I'm the Reverend Robert Foltz Morrison, and I live just 3 blocks from here. And I'm one of the millions of tenants that enjoys living in apartment buildings in New York City. And I'm here to speak in support of the City of Yes and its housing plan. I want to make that clear. As a faith leader, I've been responsible for more than 100 congregations in the 5 boroughs of the city of New York. I've served on boards, some of which worked on the city of housing, faith people, people who are from academics in bricks and mortars, and others, architects that have been involved in this planning. Also working with religious organizations that want to use their property and their land to build affordable housing, senior and supportive housing, provide space for the arts, for musicians, for dancers, for playwrights, and transitional housing for asylees and for the homeless. When so many communities were saying, not in my backyard, houses of worship saw the community need, particularly for housing, and offered their own properties. You've already heard about 1.4 vacancy rate for housing in New York. It was less than 1% for rent stabilized apartments for New Yorkers. And in 2023, New York City experienced the largest loss of rent stabilized apartments in 8 years. And the permits for new housing dropped by 76% from the previous year. So why do I care? My first apartment was one that I could afford in Parkchester as a new pastor with a $12,000 a year salary. 2 months after I moved in, management began the largest condo conversion plan in the state of New York, beginning an effort to take 8,000 affordable apartments off the market, for many for whom it was our first home. Last year, nearly 10,000 rent-stabilized apartments were lost in the city of New York. These many years later, my wife and I found a 421 rent-stabilized apartment on land that had previously belonged to the Church of the Mediator on West 231st Street. We bought it because it was accessible, she had mobility issues, and it was near the 231st train station with an elevator that she could access. We are grateful for what the church gave to the community, but even this 421 agreement has a timeline, and ourselves may find ourselves again looking at market rate housing and possibly driving us out as a now retired minister. Houses of worship alone cannot be the only places where affordable housing or the hope for better housing in the city of New York might be built. We need the wider support of all community boards and residents, not just only 10 community boards in which 16,000 new units were built in 2023 compared to 68,000 in 2022. The City of Yes provides ways by which you've already seen for low, medium, and high density neighborhoods that can contribute to more affordable housing without changing fully the character of the neighborhood, and I believe this. Why not for us? Many of us do like to live in apartment buildings in denser communities, and density is not as much of a problem for us as it may be, because 70%, I think, of people live as tenants in New York City. So why not now? Why not be people of hope? I encourage Community Board 8 not to sit on an opportunity, even with objections, but to look at how to overcome the objections, and not to look back years from now and say, we didn't do anything, we missed an opportunity, and we let the plan rot. We create the desire as a community board for doing something positive. There's been a lot of vetting across the entire city to try to tweak this thing to make it workable. It's not being forced upon us. And I encourage you as a community board to vote yes for the community of this. Thank you.
Deep great breath.
Mr. Murdler, I really enjoyed your history lesson of history that I have lived. Before anyone can consider any portion of this proposal, a community by community impact must be carefully evaluated. Much of the city's infrastructure must be repaired, replaced, and rehabilitated. An increase in density will severely impact our already overburdened infrastructure. There are 6,400 miles of sewage mains, give or take a few, whose average age is 94. Raw sewage regularly backs up into the lower floors of homes, buildings, and businesses all over the city. From Park Slope to Pelham Gardens, Southeast Queens, Garrison Beach, Staten Island, and many places in CBA. This is poop coming into your house. Epidemiologists whisper cholera and effluent-borne illnesses. The average age of our water mains is 79 years, and thousands of gallons of potable water regularly leak from those mains. And the average age of our gas mains is 66 years. I'll leave you to speculate on that. The cursory environmental review referenced in the plan reflects a callous disregard of the well-being of all New Yorkers and our environment. If so few units are to be built that a genuine review is not triggered, what's the point? A proposal of this magnitude requires an in-depth assessment and an exhaustive environmental review before any shovel is in the ground and any decision is made. For at least 40 years, every few years, each administration comes up and says, we need affordable housing, we need affordable housing. I remember ZQA, I remember all sorts of plans, but what happened? No real affordable housing. I think there needs to be a major investigation into why this supposedly affordable housing never materialized. And quite honestly, I have a nice pension and I could not afford some of those affordable housing units. I think the purpose of this really is to make construction affordable for developers. A couple of questions. In those town center units, what happens to those people who own those small businesses? You're going to build on top of them? No, you're going to rip them out. They're going to be out of a job. They're going to be gone. And who's going to take care of them? You know, and where are my small mom and pop businesses who make sure that my husband has what he wants? I urge you to reject this proposal in its entirety and not be fooled by the glittering generalities and the nice words and the pretty pictures. I did have a question about parking or a notion about parking or cars in New York City. And clearly I'm an old person and I need my car. And I live in the Bronx and you can't go from east to west in the Bronx. And I've tried it on buses. But I was also a school principal in the Central Bronx. And I can let you know that those families need their cars. Oftentimes they're picking up kids, they have 2 jobs. And I really think that the wealthy in Manhattan will always have a place to park. But people in the Bronx really should not be done out by their cars because some people think that we can build better housing without allowing families to have cars in the Bronx and Queens and the outer boroughs. Anyway, thank you very much for the time, and I really do think you answered most of my questions, so I thank you.
Karen Ogden. Karen, not 7 minutes.
I know. So I have a big report to give and I will send it in to you so you can read about it and we can talk about it at maybe another meeting or something. But I do want to read to you some of the important parts of it. I did have a proposal to show you, and I also have a report from Paul Graziano, who did an extensive description of all the changes and mapped it out. And it's just too hard to even look at today. We'll have to look at it some other time. My name is Karen Argenti, and I'm speaking for the Bronx Council for Environmental Quality. We are a 53-year-old environmental organization that is made up of volunteers. We have a board of directors and we're a membership organization. We provide a lot of education to the community on environmental issues when needed. We use our annual meeting to talk about water. We have a water conference and we talk about the impact of water, clean water, dirty water, CSOs, all kinds of things. Anyhow, Mayor Eric Adams' Department of City Planning proposal purports to address a crisis in housing availability, particularly affordable housing. and does so by lifting regulations to encourage accelerated construction. However, we expect that lifting zoning regulations would likely accelerate the construction of expensive market rate housing and reduce incentives to provide affordable units. In addition, the plan rests on factual premises that are wrong. The planning department claims that building construction is down when it is not. The plan assumes a vacancy rate that vacancy rate is an accurate measure of unoccupied apartments when it is not. The vacancy rate measures only apartments currently marketed and leaves out the large number of vacant housing that owners have held back from the market. The number of unoccupied units at more than 11.1% is actually quite high. This report that we prepared will show that the city identified the wrong target, ignoring 230,000 empty market rate housing units this year and 74,000 construction and demolition jobs since 2010 to the present day. They have not proven the need for change. The real crisis is the paucity of economical rents for low to middle income residents. Construction project numbers are the highest in the last 14 years, as is the number of units built. And I have lots of diagrams and pictures to show you and individual research that I did. But I'd like to just bring a point about the racial equity report. There is a lot of information on this project. And one of the things, in addition to the uniform land use review process, is a draft environmental impact statement. And along with these documents, the city is required to do a racial equity report. So this report that they have done for the City of Yes for Housing aims to address the housing shortage and affordability crisis in the city, both things. In fact, the data it presents tells another story. The REAR claims in its response to Section 2, which describes whether or not they have any affordable housing finance programs in this proposal. Given the citywide nature of the proposal, it is not feasible to provide a detailed breakdown of the anticipated affordability levels for all potential new housing facilitated by CHO. And then it goes on, this is all on the same page too. A UAP, which is a Uniform Affordability Preference development, could not have more than 3 income bands in AMI. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. The study, the racial equity study, is using 3 rental unit affordable AMI bands instead of just the 2 or the lowest 2 or 3. And so many times you end up with people at a very high income or not what you would consider low income, and they're in these apartments. For true racial equity, zoning laws must be developed to comply with the fair housing law so that the development mitigates rather than reinforces segregation in the city. The mayor's plan does not make any effort to even claim that a fair housing assessment was done on the City of Yes proposal. And there is no evidence that the resulting changes would affirmatively further fair housing as they must under the law. And those are strictly legal terms, affirmatively further fair housing. And so I look forward to talking to the committee about this at some other time. And I will send the documents that I talked about. I also created a short PowerPoint which describes all those charts that I use in the study. And we could go through it, but it needs a careful look. So thank you so much for letting me speak.
Karen, before you go,
Yes.
I read your report. Would you get a copy of that and any supplementary material to the board, to Farah, and we will make that available to anyone who wants a copy?
Yes.
In electronic form.
Yes, I will send it. I will send it first thing in the morning. Yes.
Bob Bender.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Bender.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chuck. My name is Bob Bender. I'm a member of the community board and a homeowner in North Riverdale. I applaud the intentions of the City of Yes housing proposal to increase the number of affordable housing units citywide. Community Board 8 has for many years identified affordable housing as one of our district's greatest needs. This opinion is shared by community boards citywide. Affordable housing ranks first by far on the list of priorities in community boards across the city. But we have to find a solution that works for every community district, recognizing that they differ greatly across the city of New York. How is it possible to build town center housing without putting merchants out of business during construction, which effectively puts them out of business permanently? Has this been successfully done anywhere else in the city of New York? Can transit-oriented development take place without changing the character of neighborhoods? This is a question, not a statement. We need to analyze the district in order to answer that question. So far as I'm aware, that analysis does not yet exist. Not every community in the city of New York is the same. Let's find a solution that works for this community as well, hopefully, as the rest of the city. I sincerely hope that we can do that because we desperately need more affordable housing in this city and in this district. Thank you.
Interrupt, as you raised the point that nobody's addressed, that's the words transit, district housing. Forgive me, but we take the prerogative of the chair. I served for 10 years as a member of the MTA. And working with Freddie Correa, we took a good hard look at transit-oriented development. There is a hub for transit-oriented development, if you think about it. So what we did was, and Freddie initiated it, along the Metro North right-of-way, going on the east side of the Bronx, we found 4 areas where there was A, available land for construction, B, where there were people who needed mass transit, had none, and C, where it could be done efficiently and economically. That kind of a local analysis is what's lacking here, piece by piece. Freddie's office did the following. They found that in Rochester, you had such a commodity. In the area around the hospitals, I think it's called Morris Park, I may be wrong, is another area because you have the condemned or old mental institution on the Hudson River Parkway, which provided acres upon acres of vacant land that could be built for affordable housing, for people who make affordable incomes, the $70,000 a year, the $50,000 a year, the $80,000, not the $200,000. Those are the people who need housing. Those are the people who will keep this city alive. Those are the people. Let me also talk about the AIM or AMI. The AMI, you were told a moment ago, we're going to insist on 60% of the AMI. Let me tell you what the AMI is in New York City. It's gauged by Scottsdale. It's part of the AMI. Roslyn, it's part of the AMI. Great Neck, all very affordable housing needing community. It's the income in those towns that jacks it up. It's a phony, it's a hoax. Thank you. Bob Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I completely share your sentiments about AMI. For instance, in the South Bronx, there is affordable housing offered to people making, I think it was $86,000, Chuck. And I really don't know if there is a group of community members in Mott Haven, in Port Morris, who would meet that affordable threshold. So I speak this evening on behalf of the Bronx Council for Environmental Quality, and our role will be statement on the environmental impact statement issued as part of this zoning text change. And I'm going to be offering today a series of 5 or 6 points in very brief form that will forecast some of our statements about what we read so far in this EIS. So first, I think the problem with the EIS so far is that it is citywide. And because it is citywide, it is almost impossible for this resolution to calculate local impact. And by that, I mean the impact of building in low-income areas that may actually lead to gentrification and higher rents. And the failure to show socioeconomic impact, which was one of the secret standards in a locality with a particular demographic, to us is a fatal flaw of any citywide resolution, but particularly this one that claims to be seeking lower housing costs. Number two, the housing shortage that's claimed in the EIS really is a term taken from an academic thesis that has only proof on New York City side in secondary sources, that is the report on supply side, that is just building more housing to solve a housing shortage, regardless of where it is and what kind of housing it is a popular academic thesis, but has never been tested in the city of New York. And it really begs the question then of for whom there is a shortage. So what we find so far is that the crisis that's claimed in the EIS needs much more particular analysis. It does not identify for whom there is a housing crisis, in what neighborhoods, and which people will benefit from the remediation of that crisis. Affordability. Affordability is claimed to be a goal of the zoning for housing opportunity, okay? It really should be a need, okay? And there's a huge difference between a zoning text that seeks to serve a affordable housing need and a one-size-fits-all developer-driven supply side thesis that claims it will remediate affordability crisis. That obviously is a worn and discredited market-driven solution to our housing crisis that really has led to skyrocketing income inequality and the very thing that's driving people from the city of New York, which is affordable housing. I'll just end with 2 quick points. We are going to be looking very carefully at the positive impacts, that is, the measurable impacts on open space, which the EIS says there will be. We can't afford to be sacrificing our open space for all kinds of reasons, health, but also climate adaptation. There is no way to really calculate the impact on sewer capacity, which we all worry about because DEP will authorize. There is no real water test of how much our sewers can accommodate for all this new housing. And lastly, I don't see an alternative analysis. I don't see an investment in affordable housing that would alleviate in this area. Perhaps bringing those voluntarily embargoed units that Karen referenced before back on the market. So right now, from a reading of the EIS, I find many questions. We will be submitting our own statement, but I hope these objections to it are helpful for the committee's deliberation. And I applaud all the incredible work that my colleague Karen Argenti did and look forward to further conversations with this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Panuzzi is the former chair of this committee. Comedian Tempest. Sure. And Sharon, I'm saving you for last. Ms. Tempest.
Thank you. Good evening, sir. I believe Sherry that was before. Oh, you're saying I should speak before her?
You're on.
Thank you so much. Good evening, esteemed members of the community board. 8, thank you so much for organizing this hearing of community views on the proposed City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, the third leg of a very extensive framework to prepare our city for the future. Thank you to Camila from DCP for presenting the impacts of this proposal in terms of the direct consequences on Community Board 8. And I'm here to add a couple of perspectives. Just to say personally, I tend to stand on very aligned with the gentleman that spoke, that found his home through the program facilitated by the Church of Mediator. And just as him, I'm a person that found my place where I raised my family here in Spartan-Dyeville in a limited equity co-op after being essentially kicked out from Brooklyn, raising rent 10 years ago. New York City is a city that keeps growing. I find, and as a former CBA environment and sanitation chair myself, and as a person that has my upper education, stemming from environmental management and industrial development as well, I found the environmental point of view to be, of course, highly relevant, but insufficient as well. The city has to cope with growing needs in our need for labor, in our ability to accommodate immigration, and in our ability to grow. These people arriving, legal or not legal, they need housing, and the city needs them. It's very easy to say, strictly from an environmental point of view, this is unacceptable, but the city administration needs to accommodate a wide range of perspective, housing, supplying services, education, etc., to simply cope with the needs of growth of our city. This is the urban environment. I mean, it was derided a little bit, the proposal being called the proposal, what was it, city of cement, Karen said. It's a city, yes, it is made of metal, cement, concrete, steel, glass, and everything else. It's a high density area by its very definition. It's not the woods of Dakota, it's not the fields of Iowa. Yes, it is a city, it is focused on transit, it needs to grow more in the public transportation sector. All of these require building. And again, how to say, all these pressures need to be considered. Solely basing opposition on an environmental stance, I find it an overly simplistic approach to deal with this. I applaud the chair for the wonderful history that he gave us. And I also must say, I testified in the City Planning Commission recent hearing on the Metro North forthcoming 4 stations in the East Bronx. He's absolutely correct that is an area that absolutely needs this approach. In fact, it will be rezoned separately. But this City of Yes for housing opportunity does give us something to chew on. And I just urge the committee, Rosemary Ginty in particular, as chair of housing this year, to give it an honest, fair look and not just go on like kind of partisan points. Our neighborhood needs to grow. Our population in CBA is what, 48% Hispanic and Latino. I mean, these were the people, brown and black, that back in the 60s and 70s ended up at the margins and ended up in situation of segregation. East Bronx, by the way, being a perfect example. And we are not there anymore. We evolved as a community board and as a city. They need housing and they keep coming. And this is the part of a population that keeps growing. I mean, have these angles of sort of racial equity in mind and the need for future growth when you analyze this. But ultimately, what I want to say is that, what is the function of the community board? To advise our elected representatives in city council. Look at what happened, what was it, yesterday morning, the city council subcommittee on zoning and land use voted yes on the second part of the proposal, right, on the City of Yes for Economic Development, with 5 pages of comments. DCP is listening. They are willing to make changes. Please give them the changes that that they could work with. Please give them something substantive, not a simple, no, we are against everything. Please give them something to improve this, but do not reject it straight, sort of say. And I will close by saying, again, what is the function of the community board? Is to advise the elected representatives. They will vote on our behalf in city council. So council members, Eric Binoit, Carmen de la Rosa, and Pierina Sanchez need to hear from you the points that you feel could be negotiated to make this proposal better. But I'm urging you as an immigrant, as a person that, again, studied with nothing in this country, that came and is building my family, and there's nothing that I love more than my community of Spuyten-Duyvil, part of CBA. There will be other people like me and like many of you, with skin colors that were did not have the same opportunities, and you as community board members have an important role to play, and this is an important moment of time in time, and I thank you in advance for the diligence that I know you will apply to all of these proposals, and finding the deeper meaning into what it means to be able to construct, you know, a small unit in the back of your house for your grandmother to sit there, and all of these things. All of these things have like generational implications for families, and I know you will look at them again, seeing the deeper meaning and shepherding the community into the future with a good regard to the past. So thank you again for listening to me.
Rita Paul, the former chair of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and an architect.
Well, after all of that promotion, thank you. Thank you. I am Sherida Paulson. I am an architect, senior principal of PKSB Architects. We do schools, we do housing, we do lots of landmarks work, and we do a number of projects in the Special Natural Area District. I first want to thank the chair of this committee for the illuminating history, because it is true that there is a long history with respect to the zoning resolution and a lot of other city agencies that are involved in enforcing it. I also want to thank Camilla for doing an excellent presentation for city planning of the big picture goals of the proposal. But I'm a very practical person at the end of the day. And having read through the city council committee's modifications that are proposed to the City of Yes for economic development, I believe first and foremost, the housing portion should be taken back, and we should wait for the modifications that are required by many of the changes that the city council has requested city planning to make. They will affect the sort of 4-story over ground floor retail, because that is not going to be coming into some of the residential districts at the lower density that were promoted as part of economic development. There are other components of the limitations on the size of home businesses and the limitation on the number of people who can work in those home businesses that will really color how we look at the housing piece. As far as the housing piece, I have long been a proponent of making zoning fit the neighborhood. That's one of the primary reasons that the Riverdale Nature Preservancy was founded, and it's one of the reasons that the Preservancy continues to argue for neighborhood character. Our special natural area district, which benefits everyone in the district, and many people across the Bronx, because we do have our parks and open space, it is protected by having yard requirements that limit the footprint of the building. And that is essential to maintaining waterways, the rock outcroppings, the planted areas that allow this district to breathe. The City of Yes takes as currently drafted, takes a one size fits all, limits the setback areas to 5 feet for side yards, smaller for the front yards, which would expand the footprint of the building and be counter to the principles of the special natural area district. I would ask our district's committee to look closely at, and this is coming because I've spent the last weeks reading through the actual text proposed. They are eliminating the certification procedure for development in the special natural area district, which means that many of the applications for less complicated projects would be going straight to the Department of Buildings for as of right review, which was something that we argued very vehemently against during the recent, not that long ago, proposal to update the SNAD regulations. The other part of it that is concerning is that Community District 8, and this goes to the issues of affordability, Community District 8 has old infrastructure. And one of the key points in developing affordable housing is finding ways to reduce the costs. And I think the excellent summary that talked about where do you find these sites, the bottom line is in our area, the cost of upgrading utilities and infrastructure, that's gas, water lines, schools, everything that goes into making a community livable, that adds cost to development. That makes it more expensive. And lastly, to talk about transit-oriented development, I've been a member of the Congress for New Urbanism. I've long argued for increasing development where it makes sense next to train stations and transit. But in our condition, the Riverdale train station is oversubscribed for its parking. People can't get to that train station in any easy way. And it should not be used as an example of a transit that could expand the boundaries of accessible and convenient housing. It's down a very steep street. Most people have to drive to get to it unless they live, as some members of the committee, within very close walking distance. I can't walk to it in the winter, and I'm not that far away. And so they run shuttle buses to get people there. So I think the key thing is zoning needs to relate to the districts that it's looking at, and having a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. I support the commission in trying to clean up the zoning resolution. As a practitioner, I can only say the many levels and layers of text that have been added over the years are totally confusing. And there is a lot in this effort that should be applauded because it will go to simplifying it and making it easier to understand. But the design changes that are being proposed in this set of regulations are not appropriate, and that's a word I get to use as a landmarks person, for this community board. Thank you.
I believe, is there any other hand up? No. I believe that is it. We have the next meeting scheduled for June 17th. This special committee was discussed. I would like to just make one suggestion. The city would be, in my view, very well advised if it did the following. It deferred this major change 90 days, 120, because now we finally have the text. Deferred it so that A, the city council can act, as Sharita has pointed out, and B, so that it could be studied at least by some of the institutions. I know one of them has a request of some enlightened developers taking it upon itself to do an impartial study of pieces of it. We need to do this thoroughly. If we do not do it thoroughly, it will be a political decision that we will rule. I repeat, go look at San Francisco, go look at Newark, look at Portland. All of those places and many others rushed into a political decision. Politicians don't always make correct decisions. Thank you and good night. Wait. Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Chairman, I just wanted to know if any members of the committee have any questions for city planning about any aspects of the proposal.
That
If
was
not-
that was the point that's thought just made. So give us a minute. Laura? Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, I have some questions, but I think they could be quickly answered. First on SRO model. What zoning districts will they be permitted as of right, and is it tied into the transit zone? You know, the shared house.
Thank you. That's a good question. We propose to allow shared housing, which is housing that shares either cooking facilities or other common spaces in every zoning district except 1 and 2 family districts where we will not allow shared housing, but districts that allow multifamily would also allow shared housing.
Okay, so it's not related to transit zones, it's every district from R3 to 4 and up, is what you're saying?
That's correct. In any district that allows multifamily, you would be able to do shared housing as well, but it would not be available in 1 or 2 family districts.
Thank you, I'm sorry, I have a few other questions.
Go ahead.
May I? Oh, thank you. Regarding parking, I read in the DEIS scope of work that it states, I'll quote, create discretionary action to remove parking requirements for existing buildings. Do you have any details on that? Because it sounds like what you're proposing now is the camel's nose under the tent, and soon you'll be having this action for existing buildings removing parking. Can you comment?
Thanks. Another good question. So we are not proposing to remove parking requirements for existing housing. The thinking there is many people have their parking space, have their car in a particular multifamily rental building, for instance, somewhere in the city, and we do not want owners of those buildings to be able to unilaterally remove the parking and kick the tenants out of their spot. However, we want to provide a pathway involving public review for those buildings to remove parking, but that would go to community boards, it would go to the city planning commission, and it would involve saying what you were going to do with the area where the parking would be removed.
Thank you. On transit zone, I was told, is it true that if any part of the street is located in the transit zone, the entire street is considered a transit zone?
Sorry about that. So the way that it works is if your block intersects with the greater transit zone, then anywhere in that block is considered part of the transit zone. In order to ease issues with applicability, if it applied strictly on a radius level, there would be a lot of arguments at DOB and elsewhere as to whether a particular zoning lot was in or out. Applying it to an entire block minimizes those types of ambiguities.
So it's true, okay. Air rights, which is not in this presentation tonight. We have many landmark buildings, and I have read that City of Yes would allow the transfer of air rights from individually designated landmarks over a much larger area and with greatly reduced public review. Will you be providing details on that?
Sure, we're happy to. We could even send you a slide on it. So basically, the Landmark Transferable Development Rights Program was created in 1968 as a way to provide support for landmarks, which, you know, can't redevelop their floor area on their sites. Typically, they can't redevelop their sites in general. And so in a limited way, landmarks were allowed to transfer unused development rights to other zoning lots, either adjacent or that would be adjacent, if not for an intervening street or intersection. So it's a fairly tight radius. Also, it requires a full special permit today, which since the 1960s has evolved into what we know today as ULURP. That can take a couple years. It can, you know, cost a couple $100,000 in consultants. And so it is not a meaningful means of support for any landmarks anymore. In fact, since 1968, I think we've had about a dozen transfers. And so, you know, I've spent a lot of time during the lead up to these proposals talking to faith-based organizations and other individual landmarks around the city, many of which are, you know, frankly struggling to support themselves. I was talking to, you know, a landmarked Episcopal church in Crown Heights a couple months ago, whose roof is literally collapsing. And when I explained to them our proposal to modify the transferable development rights program, they were incredibly grateful that they would have an opportunity to transfer those rights, get revenue, and repair the roof. So here's how we're proposing to change it. Instead of being able to transfer only to adjacent zoning lots or across the street, you can transfer anywhere on the block or across the street, or a lot across the street from that block. So it's not expanding it dramatically, it's just expanding it across the block and across the street from that block. It will still require, public review wise, it will still require an authorization, which goes to the community board and to the CPC, if bulk modifications are necessary on the receiving site. So if you need to change the zoning in any way on the receiving site to accommodate those development rights, then it gets the public review I mentioned, community board, CPC. If it doesn't, if the receiving site can accommodate those development rights without any changes to the zoning at all, then it could be a certification. If no changes to zoning are necessary, then nothing beyond what was contemplated when that zoning was put in place is going to happen. And so we don't see public review as necessary. This will create meaningful opportunities to provide financial support to hundreds of struggling individual landmarks across the city. So we're those like faith-based organizations and other individual landmarks have been incredibly excited about this possibility.
I have other questions, but let me pass this on. Thank you.
I have a question.
Hi, so I have a question just with the transit-oriented development. You guys are proposing to allow modest 2 to 3, 5-story family apartments. I just understand that we already have issues with those, and I'd like to know, is there, you know, with the new development of extending modest 2 to 3 family homes, like, is city planning considering adding elevators to units since the original stop that is in existence is not ADA? What has been addressed regarding trash collection and ventilation issues that are, you know, are continuous with that? Like, are you guys going to be addressing that with new construction if you do allow modest 2 to 3 family apartment building continuation? Like, I just want to make sure that, you know, particularly like I can testify that my own parents, right, when they immigrated to this country, they started in one of these modest buildings, and you know, as you grow in the city, you just, at some point, you can't even access your apartment anymore because there's no elevator. You can't even bring down your garbage. You can't bring up you can't shop, you can't do anything. You actually end up evicting yourself just by the normal grace of aging. So I'm interested to know whether or not, city planning is going to make sure that these new modest houses are ADA and address trash collection and ventilation and package rooms, right? So making sure that there is spaces where people can pick up their packages, because, you know, these issues continue to be a problem, and, you know, continuing this construction isn't fixing it per se.
Okay, thank you. Those are great questions. So elevators are required for any buildings that are 4 stories or higher. They may be provided to shorter buildings than that, but it's not required below 4 stories. We are making changes in the zoning to modernize trash collection as well. For instance, the zoning regulations that regulate trash rooms today are horrifically outdated. They're 12 square foot trash rooms per floor, in a way that predates recycling, it predates ADA requirements, and it does not allow for instance, centralized trash collection. In particular, like these row containers that in larger buildings enable you to collect the trash and get it picked up all at once instead of piling trash bags on the sidewalk. So we're really excited about that. And new housing in general is a lot more accessible than the types of housing stock that we see from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so we're, of course, always excited when new housing can be built subject to baseline ADA requirements. And then when it's affordable, HPD has an extra layer of accessibility requirements for any affordable units as well.
Sure. Okay, yeah, I guess I would just, personally, like, I understand that it's not required to add an elevator. It's not required to do certain things, but I do want to just, like, if we can consider adding that, being that the existing buildings don't have it, right? So when people that live in those old buildings age out of accessing their own apartment can rely on the new housing stock here, you know, with like, you know, all these things that aren't required, but as we know that they're not gonna access their old apartments and it is a consuming issue.
I agree with you completely with these 6-story walk-ups that predate
It's a
any
problem,
modern
yeah.
code requirements. And so any new 6-story building, for instance, would be required to have an elevator in a way that obviously can accommodate a senior better than an old 6-story semi-fireproof walk-up where seniors are stuck on the 5th or 6th floor and afraid to go out.
Right, my concern is just with, you know, even the 5-story walk-ups where it's not required, just.
It
to
is
make
required
sure we
there,
have-
too.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
And I had a question, this is in the ADUs, accessory dwelling unit section. You have mentioned here, Department of City Planning and the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice have convened an interagency working group to develop the ADU proposal. Who is this interagency working group and how can they get contacted?
Great question. So I would say the main participants are city planning, housing preservation and development, Department of Buildings, FDNY, Mach-E-J, DEP. I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting anybody. But the idea is to create a workable set of regulations for accessory dwelling units, whether basement, whether attic, whether detached rear yard, whether attached rear yard, that absolutely preserve the health and safety of any occupants. For instance, we're working with Mach-E-J and DEP to ensure that we are not enabling subgrade units in the 100-year floodplain, of course, and also examining ways to regulate that for stormwater flood areas too, to make sure that we're allowing ADUs to provide a little more space or a little more income for homeowners without creating any health and safety issues.
Staying on the subject of ADUs, is ADUs meant to be temporary housing? I saw that it was a max occupancy of 2. Can you explain more? Are ADUs meant to be temporary housing? Or is the life cycle of a growing family being addressed with ADUs? What's going on? Why can't he's muted?
You're muted, John.
You're muted.
I know the host was not letting me unmute. I'm sorry. So ADUs, no, any unit created through these proposals today are for permanent occupancy. None of them are for transient occupancy. None are intended as temporary housing. All are Class A units that would be for permanent occupancy only. And we're working with Office of Special Enforcement to ensure that shared housing proposals or ADUs or whatever don't create any risk of other use for those units.
Before I mentioned Jamal, Jerusalem that's being done, any building that goes above 3 stories must then have an improvement. Both that, namely an elevator, and refuse facility. That's what required by the city of Houston. Anyone.
Margaret Racer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, I was curious about the incentive for more commercial space. In our district, there's still a good number of storefronts that are empty, and it's been that way since before the pandemic. And so what are the incentives or the economics behind increasing storefronts?
That's a great question. I mean, dealing with commercial space was primarily the subject of the economic opportunity proposals that were recently approved by the City Council Committee. I think that was, just yesterday. However, there are some aspects of these proposals that are pertinent to your question. For instance, one of the benefits we see with town center zoning, that is 2, 3, 4 stories of residential above a commercial ground floor, is the fact that you'll have more people on those commercial corridors to help them thrive. And I think town center is one of the best examples of the way that when we were devising these programs, we looked to New York City's past, to the types of housing that worked really well. It's an iconic building form, 2, 3, 4 stories of residential above a commercial ground floor, but we made it illegal. And you can't do it today. And so we wanted to bring that back in a way that will provide a little additional density on those commercial corridors, support business owners, and at the same time create a little more housing in that iconic building form that, you know, we have a ton of from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Lastly, what confidence could we have that our transportation could keep up with this? I think despite money going towards NTA and others, that we still have not seen efficiencies in transportation and the ability to modernize our system and come anywhere close to any other major city.
That's a great question. And, you know, we have received questions of that sort along the full range of infrastructure categories: transportation, water and sewer, school seats, open space. And, you know, I want to emphasize just the fundamental nature of our approach here. We are talking about a proposal that is estimated under our legally mandated environmental review. That is, if we get it wrong, we're extremely legally vulnerable. We're estimated to create 0.7 units per acre over 15 years. 0.7 units per acre over 15 years. That emphasizes that the secret sauce to these proposals is just the widest possible geography. For the first time in our history, we're looking at neighborhoods across the full range, from 1 and 2 family homes all the way up to the highest density parts of the city. I push back on the idea that this is one size fits all, because we have different types of proposals for every type of neighborhood across that range of densities. And this is the approach that we have that can actually make a real dent in our housing shortage, which is, you know, become absolutely soul crushing. The conversation around this has changed significantly over the last 5 or 10 years, without changing neighborhood character anywhere, without overtaxing infrastructure. You mentioned transportation, but without overtaxing water and sewer, open space, school seats. Again, 0.7 units per acre over the next 15 years. So that is the basic answer to the infrastructural questions. That said, all of our sister agencies that we're working on the environmental review with are using this as a once in a decade opportunity to take a comprehensive look at their systems across the entire city. The administration really wants to get this done, so it's also a point of unique leverage for neighborhoods like yours to get things that you need out of the administration and its agencies as we, you know, move towards, we hope, you know, actually enacting a plan, a meaningful plan.
I'm a little confused. It's my understanding, because the number of units is so low for the next 15 years, that you avoided triggering significant adverse impacts that would have made you examine land use, water, infrastructure, sewer, that kind of thing, that it's not being looked at in an environmental impact station because statement because of this lowball number, which also confuses me because in the last 14 years under the current zoning, we have built, we have 74,000 demolition and construction permits for buildings, and you're talking about, you know, the small number of units. I just think that it's not right that you didn't have a proper EIS.
Think about it this way. Think about it this way. If we're doing a neighborhood rezoning that's proposing to bring a few thousand units to a neighborhood for the first time, that is going to trigger a lot of impacts. You're taking a neighborhood, dropping 3,000 units on it. You're going to have open space. You're going to have school seats. You're going to have water and sewer. You're going to have everything else. This, because it's so broad geographically, we're not dropping 1,000 units anywhere. It's a large number of units overall. We're projecting on the upper end over 100,000 units overall. But because the city is so big, that doesn't mean a ton of, it's just very incremental changes in any one area. And so following the state and city mandated environmental review processes, that's right. We don't find big impacts in this particular water and sewer catchment area or this particular school district, because overall we're talking about 0.7 units per acre over 15 years. It should not be a surprise that 0.7 units per acre in a given community district, in a given borough, citywide, it shouldn't be a surprise that that doesn't trigger many different impacts. That said, this is the biggest environmental review we've ever done.
Yeah, what the surprise is that they have to do this whole city of yes for such an estimated small number of units. And I don't know whether this is in anybody's control in the open market, how much and where developers choose to build. But I have my last question, and I apologize. Several speakers tonight talked about town center zoning, and has it been an issue in other cities where you have your current commercial areas, they do not have housing on top of them currently, so a developer goes to the landlord, to the owner, and buys that property, and he is now under city of yes going to build 4 stories above a new commercial area. Doesn't this displace? You can't just, you know, you can't build apartment buildings on top of what's there currently. So what I'm anticipating that the mom and pop stores that have been here for many, many years, there will be demolition and there will be displacement, and then higher rents, and they're not coming back. Has this happened elsewhere? Because I mean, this is an engineering issue, and I have spoken to people, and they have agreed that you can't just plop apartment buildings on top of what's there now. So how do you deal with that?
Great. In our discussions with various stakeholders, in our looks at other cities, here's what tends to happen. You're probably aware, like the speaker earlier noted, that there's a retail vacancy issue in many parts of New York City today. Those are the sites that tend to redevelop because they're not generating income for the landlord. You can't just displace a commercial tenant if they have a lease, and commercial leases tend to be longer term. It's not year to year generally like it is for a tenant in an apartment or something like that. And so what you see is redevelopment going to where the opportunities are, which tend to be the vacant sites. And so you get a win-win situation. You redevelop the site with more housing on it, and you create more people for the commercial corridor, and you have a new space that's much easier to lease than whatever one-story taxpayer you had there before.
Let me just give you though the other side of that point. Take Gun Hill Road. That is occupied primarily by precisely the kind of buildings you're talking about. Ground floor stores and above them residential. And what happened on Gun Hill Road, and it's still happening, is that the stores are vacant. Life has come in throughout the entire neighborhood, and the buildings are eroding. Mailboxes are being gutted, which is the first sign of life. That's the other side of the coin. You just can't do that. That neighborhood is better than Kelsey.
Yeah, we're not proposing to extend commercial uses beyond the locations where they are today in a way that leads to over retailing, in a way that exacerbates vacancy and leads to the types of situations you're describing. We're merely proposing to provide an opportunity where appropriate to redevelop sites that today may have one-story taxpayers with that classic building, New York City building form, a couple, 3 stories of residential above a commercial ground floor. To be honest, we've gotten such great feedback about this proposal in particular. People really think it makes sense and that it provides meaningful opportunities. And that's from neighborhood residents, and it's also from owners of these taxpayers and other folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
I will be quicker than the budget. I will be quicker than everybody else so far. I live on the top floor of the tallest building on Palisade Avenue, so you can't make a neighborhood more dense than mine. I'm not worried personally about this, but I do have several concerns. I would repeat what Bob Bender said, that we generally are interested in more affordable housing in the neighborhood. But let me just share 4 statistics with you. Given the 1961 zoning resolution that this is all working on, I quickly looked on my phone at some census statistics. The US population in 1960 was 179 million. It just about doubled by 2020. And it had doubled from 1910. So basically the US population doubled in those 2 periods. However, from 1960 to 2020, New York City went from about 7.8 million to 8.8 million, a 13% increase. Yet in the previous half century, it had increased by 65%. In the Bronx, in the first half of the 20th century, tripled in population and has been flat for the last half century. So that suggests to me that while there is a fair concern here, I don't think that we should be approaching this with, sort of hair on fire, that this has to be done yesterday. I've long agreed with Mr. Mergler's approach of there's so much information here. It's so hard for us to absorb. We need help. We need professionals, outside professionals, such as Columbia's School of Architecture or Engineering at Cooper Union, or there's several top-rate institutions in the city that could help us to see all sides of it, not just my statistics or their statistics or their statistics. If we're going to be doing something that will have the longevity of something like the 61 resolution, then we should take a little more time and have a broader, more full analysis of all this to do it right. Just 2 questions, and you don't necessarily have to answer them now if you just get back to us. Ms. Thomas talked about that if this had been in place, there would be a $58.2 billion increase to our economy. I'd sure like to know where that number comes from. And then she also said that building parking is expensive. I find that hard to believe because there's no plumbing, there is no heating or being sent through there. You don't have the bathtubs, the sinks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can't believe that that parking is expensive. It may reduce the profitability for a developer, but I don't see how it's expensive. Thank you.
Those are great questions. So to your first one, where the 58.2 billion come from, that's EDC's estimate. They have the expertise in that type of forecasting that city planning doesn't. The administration had them run the numbers, and that's where it came from. As far as
get that back to us.
Pardon?
Please ask them to provide us that information to the community.
Okay. As far as the cost of parking, industry estimates put that at about $70,000 per spot. You're correct that that's not as expensive as it would cost to produce a residential unit, but $70,000 per spot for structured parking isn't nothing. And in New York City, often the bigger obstacle is not money, but space. So we often see, developers stop at whatever the parking waiver threshold is, because if they built one more unit, it would trigger, a 6-spot parking requirement. And that means that developers very often leave units on the table. They use sites inefficiently because there's nowhere to put the parking. And, that hurts the most when you're on a site like 3-minute walk from a subway or something like that. And I can tell you it happens all the time. Housing gets left on the table to avoid parking requirements 3 minutes from a subway.
70,000 sounds like an opportunity cost, not a financial one.
That's the cost of building structured parking.
That's structured park. This would abolish all forms of parking.
If you have space on your site for parking, you're probably not in the highest density parts of the city. And we fully expect that if you have space on your site to provide parking in a spot that's not the highest density parts of the city, you will continue to provide it. And this is exactly what we see, not only in other jurisdictions that have eliminated parking mandates, but also even in New York City, in places like Southern Brooklyn or in places like Eastern Queens, where applicants often build more parking than required under the zoning because they have the space and they think that their tenants are going to want it. So eliminating parking mandates does not mean no more parking will be provided. We just really want to underscore that.
All right, anyone else? Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I just want to address, amenities, in this new housing proposal. I didn't see any mention of rooftop gardens, playgrounds, public spaces within, all this housing proposal. And I am concerned that this city of cement kind of ideology is being pushed hard from your proposal, because unfortunately, I just didn't see, as one of the greenest boroughs in your city, like that's our charm. And, this proposal does directly threaten that in many ways. And I'd just like to hear, like, what are the ideas coming from city planning and, why isn't it in this proposal?
It is actually, for the first time, we are extending a requirement for certain types of amenities to all multifamily buildings. And we're even providing an allowance in the zoning to incentivize even more provision of amenity spaces, such as indoor or outdoor recreation spaces, like you mentioned. New multifamily buildings will be able to exempt up to 5% of their floor area specifically for those types of spaces, and they will be required to provide at least 3% of their floor area for those types of spaces. So we're really excited to, improve the zoning in that way as well.
After 5 years or 3 years, as you have found in city planning, time and again, you change these requirements. They are abolished by the owner of the building, who puts them either to another use or saves the money on it. You can't enforce it, especially when the city of New York eliminates building inspectors who are supposed to do it. You just play with yourself.
On the contrary, we find that once amenity spaces are provided initially, that tenants demand that they, maintain in use because they've been using them. And HPD gets calls quite often, or DOB gets calls quite often when spaces that are required in housing are, converted by an owner to some other use. So it is something that gets enforced against, and it is actually something that the tenants themselves are often, the first line of defense.
I'm happy to give you a tour of where they have been abandoned.
It's a big city. I don't doubt that there are instances of that, but I'm saying in general, these spaces are used as intended.
General, opposite after 5 years. Go to Redme, they'll tell you that. There's somebody who, you, Marty, I'm sorry.
I'm just having trouble with one of the first comments made in the presentation, is that there's no attempt to change the character of the community. I have to believe that once a homeowner decides to sell his or her house to allow for a 4-story building in the middle of an R1, R2 district, there will soon be an explosion of people trying to sell their property and create more and more of those. As valuable as the housing may be, there goes the character of the community. What happened is.
So 4-story buildings would not be permitted in R1 or R2. And in fact, only a very small percentage of R1 and 2 districts would have opportunity to use any of the missing middle proposals like town center or transit-oriented development, because of all the commercial districts tend not to be mapped over R1 or R2. And because R1 and R2 tends to be farther from transit or not meet other criteria, such as lot size, such as wide street, there's very limited opportunity for multifamily in R1 and R2. For those districts, basically the only game is the option to add an ADU for, you know, a multi-generational family, or for middle-income households that may need a little extra money for household expenses.
All right.
Marty, can't that happen now? Can't that happen now? Did that happen with that house off of Ross Park and Villa Barone and like that's what's happening already, no?
It's gold rush, it's gonna start with the benefit of developers. Where you have an incentive to build more, you increase for the developer the advantage to do it, and when he does it, all the neighbors go up. That's what Rosemary found when she was doing the examination over at Claflin Avenue, that area. We had people of color who had bought the private house. And they were beautiful. You should see the picture of the architect. One large house was built, 4-story, 5-story, don't remember. And the whole lot was threatened.
I have a suggestion, if I may, for this committee. I would like to focus on the impacts on our 197A plan, particularly the areas that we downzone under this plan, and see how it intersects with the transit zone and what those possibilities are. Is anyone interested in working on that?
No, Laura, we should talk about finding some way to get an architectural student. Let's do that for
We have this
money with.
You know, because I looked at, I started to look at the plan and I see, you know, North Riverdale, Central Riverdale, Spiky Garden, Riverdale and the Hudson, Van Cortlandt Village and Kingsbridge. I don't know exactly where the meets and bounds are and how it intersects with this transit zone, but they're very vulnerable. I mean, we downzone them, but they basically transit zone upzones them. Right? Okay, so.
There's a very wonderful architect, I believe on board. You might ask her that question.
Sure.
Sorry, Sharita, I just volunteered you.
And I want to underscore that transit-oriented development, there are layers of criteria you have to satisfy in order to qualify. So you got to be in the geography, and you got to have a large site over 5,000 square feet, and you have to be on a wide street, or you have to be on the short end of a block. And so when we drill down, this provides some opportunity on the margin for the types of sites that have multifamily today already. They do not provide the opportunity for a bunch of sites in a given neighborhood to convert to missing middle multifamily. Unfortunately,
5,000 square.
Transit-oriented district and zoning included in either it was MIH or the other one?
No, so town center and TOD are both for R1 through R5 districts. Those are what we consider low density districts in New York City. MIH only applies in R6 to R10, medium and high density districts with building typologies that can support affordability mandates. Typical multifamily sites in lower density districts generally aren't big enough on a typical site to support affordability mandates.
I'm talking about transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented.
Yeah, transit-oriented development, we expect it to allow modest multifamily, 3, 4, 5-story, 6, 12 units, something like that. That's not a building typology that typically can support affordability mandates. So we don't want to basically throw up new obstacles to that housing at the same time as we're trying to remove them. So MIH, mandatory inclusionary housing, remains in R6 through R10.
Please answer my question. Transit-oriented development was a concept that was included in the presentation from MIH and the rest, am I correct?
The transit-oriented development proposal that was presented today is for large lots on wide streets or short ends of the block within a half mile of a transit stop. And it's only for low density. It's not for high density. And so MIH areas and TOD areas will be mutually exclusive geographically.
For the third time, am I correct? The transit-oriented development was a proposal that was included. It may have had different language, but it was called transit-oriented development. It was in either MIH or ZQU, but now I'm all of it was.
No, there was no formal proposal called transit-oriented development as part of MIH and ZQA.
I'm going to check on that because I remember it coming up.
Okay, I think Sherida has her hand up.
Sherida, last question. Sherida.
Thank you. While there seems to be a lack of sites for the transit-oriented development up zoning, as Laura's described it, the area that is zoned R4, which is where the Hebrew Home for the Aged, now River Spring, is located, does fall into many of the categories that would allow for a type of senior housing to be developed. And those are large sites. They have community facility uses, which are religious affiliations. And one of the goals of the special permit process was to maintain the large amount of open space that had been part of the development plan of the Passionist Fathers occupancy on the site. And we were successful in limiting the scale of the development on that site. And I think it would be important, because it's in the R1 zone, it would be important to allow for this proposal to maintain similar caps on development in the R1 zone. It is close to the train station, but nobody's walking there.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all.
Sorry, Chair, please. I'm sorry that I left a few lingering questions unanswered. So if I could just do cleanup really quickly. This is the largest affordable housing plan that we've ever forwarded in the zoning, and we heard a lot about that tonight. It will produce more income restricted units at an average of 60% AMI in 10 years than we've created throughout all zoning programs for affordable housing since their advent in 1987. So for folks who spoke tonight about affordable housing, I want to underscore this is the biggest thing we've ever done. We've pushed down AMIs to 60. We've allowed income averaging. We expect to see a range of units from about 30 to 90. 30% AMI is $1,000 for a new 2-bedroom. 60% AMI is about $2,000 for a new 2-bedroom. We expect to create about 20,000 units over 10 years. That is extremely meaningful for people who are suffering under the housing shortage. I heard Karen Argenti talk about whether or not this affirmatively furthers fair housing. I want to say these proposals emerged directly from our fair housing report issued in 2020. This is the Fair Housing Report to HUD, where we have to talk about the steps that we are taking to affirmatively further fair housing. I'll be honest, this was when Vicki Bean was deputy mayor. She's a fair housing expert herself. When she got all the agencies in the room to say, okay, what are the meaningful things that we can do to affirmatively further fair housing, we came up with a great list of proposals. To be honest, I was like, we're never going to propose these. There's no way. There's no way that they're politically viable. I have been amazed at how much the conversation has changed around housing in the last few years, unfortunately, as the housing shortage has gotten worse. But if you want to see where these proposals come from, it's not some like secret developer report that we're secretly trying to implement. It is from our Fair Housing Report 2020, Where We Live, New York City, submitted to HUD as the ways that we can affirmatively further fair housing. And we knew that it would be extremely difficult to propose and enact things like this. And it's largely because you go to neighborhoods, you go to community boards, and people do not want more housing in their neighborhood. And so for generations in New York City, it's been easy to ignore these issues, especially in wealthier and lower density areas. And that's why I'm incredibly proud to be coming to you tonight to give our earnest presentation of what we think would be the biggest set of proposals for fair housing in New York City. We really encourage you to provide your feedback. We can make this plan better. We are listening to you. We've provided worksheets to every community board. You can go through each proposal and tell us what you like and what you don't. It's a long conversation. The proposals are going to change. And I just want to say that we absolutely will take into consideration any feedback you provide to make the plan work better for you. And so thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
So let me give you one feedback point. Get the commission to extend the period of time so people can think about it. You've given us bare weeks after issuing the report. I'm not saying it was done for any improper reason. I'm saying you ought to officially extend the period. To remind you, giving it to the beginning of the summer. If you extended it to September, you'd get a serious report. Thank you very much. Oh, hey, Artie. Go ahead.
Sorry, one more thing. We absolutely are accepting any feedback from community boards up until the final commission vote, which will be in September. So take all summer if you want, as long as we get that report from you before the vote sometime in September, we absolutely will take it into consideration.
Let me tell you, we have shafted on that previously. So what I say to you is, if you seriously mean it, and I don't doubt you individually, I mean the commission, do it in writing. Say to the board, you have until September. Then you have a good shot at getting serious comment. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I bid you a fond good night.
Second.
I made it, I passed.